The spring racing season of 2001 in the United States gets into its stride. Usually it's the highlight of the horse racing calendar, but this year, word began spreading round breeders that something was seriously wrong. Many farm managers had confirmed an unusually high number of stillbirths and miscarriages in their prized brood mares. At Margaux Farm in the heart of bluegrass country, breeder Steve Johnson discovered that illness had affected his horses too.
We had some inkling that everybody had been impacted, and we expected the worst, and sure enough, that's what we found.
Unlike other farms, they didn't find a great number of dying foals, but what they did discover was an unexpectedly high number of early pregnancies lost.
We had 26 mares that had been bred prior to the middle of March, and of that 26, after we'd done the initial checks, we found 10 that we thought were pregnant or had been pregnant, and then subsequently were not.
Kentucky's famous bluegrass in spring is a time for the next crop of thoroughbred foals. But in the spring of 2001, fear of the unknown forced many breeders to keep the horses in barns. The entire industry anxiously waited word on the cause of more than 500 foal deaths and an even larger number of miscarriages or stillbirths.
It struck everywhere all at once in a very narrow time period, and generally an infectious disease will strike one area and then spread like a fire spreads. This really didn't have that way. There was no line of transmission that was apparent. Everybody at the same time was hit pretty heavily.
Veterinarian Chris Newton spends most of his nights and days working in the field. He got first-hand experience dealing with the syndrome.
We started seeing, right before Derby, some of these mares losing their foals. I had several clients who lost a substantial number of stillborn foals during that period of time and had difficult birthings. I probably lost 30 to 40 pregnancies in very early mares. You're sort of getting over the first hump of the breeding season, and you are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and then that happens and it just takes the air out of you.
At the Rood and Riddle Equine Hospital in Lexington, a few days later, the number of dead and dying foals mounted.
We saw several, many more foals, sick foals, than we would normally see this time of year with a situation called premature placental separation. Foals that were born sick, foals that were born either weak or in cardiovascular shock.
The foals were treated in critical care units in one of the largest animal hospitals in the central Kentucky area. And many concerned breeders brought in their mares before they gave birth to try and offset the effects of the disease. For veterinarians, there were many sleepless nights trying to nurse hundreds of foals back to health.
We would sometimes see a foal that was just weak and having difficulty standing. We would have to feed that foal with a nasogastric tube. We would sometimes have to put them on parenteral nutrition, which is an IV nutrition. We would also see not just the weak foal, we might see all the way to the other spectrum, a foal that was suffering from cardiovascular collapse. And in that situation, resuscitation would be necessary. Sometimes oxygen therapy, emergency shock doses of fluids, and other drugs might be necessary.
The pressure was on researchers to come up with a cause for the mystery ailment, and everyone in Kentucky, indeed everyone in the horse racing industry worldwide, was talking about it.
It is not a contagious disease. We know it's not a disease that's transmitted from animal to animal. And this is really good news to know.
The racing industry is Kentucky's economic powerhouse. And because of its preeminent status, it attracts the best research scientists in the equine field. The Maxwell Gluck Equine Research Center was the natural point for the breeders, veterinarians and researchers to collect and analyze their information. An equine epidemiologist, Dr. David Powell, says infectious diseases and the water supply were ruled out early in the investigation, what is now known as mare reproductive loss syndrome.
We are still left primarily with looking at possible options as a result of horses grazing pastures. And in addition to that, we've had this unique phenomenon of a large number of caterpillars being present on horse farms at this time. And this is something that we're also looking into.
Researchers also discovered the 2001 outbreak was an eerie echo of another illness 20 years ago.
It happened in the early 80s, and it was sort of written off to multiple environmental factors, and now it's happening now, and we're seeming to write it off to multiple environmental factors, and hopefully we'll come down with a final causative agent.
Scientists have come up with one working theory of what caused the syndrome. Somehow cyanide, naturally occurring in cherry trees, was ingested by the mares. And while scientists say they haven't yet met reasonable standards of scientific proof, this is the best theory they have. Eastern tent caterpillars who nest in the cherry trees and are immune to the poisons in the leaves are also believed to have played a role in the syndrome. That theory, however, has holes. No one is sure how the poison gets to the mare or how much poison it would take to affect the foals.
I got to tell you, I mean, there were so many tent caterpillars. I've never seen the caterpillars around here like what there were. I mean, there were fence posts that were just alive with them. You couldn't walk across the fields without stepping on one or two. And all the wild cherry trees were just completely denuded, and these things were off just looking for anything green that they could consume. And there's no way that a horse could have avoided not eating either some of their feces or the caterpillar themselves. I mean, they were just that thick and that prevalent.
And while the immediate crisis may be over, the impact of this year's breeding failures will be felt for years to come. The Kentucky Thoroughbred Association puts the loss of more than 500 foals this year, with 2,000 losses predicted for next year. The estimated costs, $200 million.
Well, straight away are going to be the breeders, the people that board horses, the stallion managers. They will be impacted immediately. For those foals that were not born alive, there'll be no stud fee paid. So the stallion managers, stallion owners will be impacted there. Then the breeder is going to be impacted because he doesn't have a crop to sell in the following years. The feed companies will be impacted. The veterinarians will be impacted. Blacksmiths will be impacted.
The impact will certainly be felt at Keeneland, a mainstay of the Lexington local economy with its combination racehorse and horse sales company. Keeneland is used as a year-round training facility, as well as hosting 2 main races and 6 sales throughout the year. It's also the biggest dollar horse auction company in the world, last year selling $750 million worth of horses. In an already tight market for racehorses, there'll be fewer coming up for sale this year and even more drastic cuts in next year's foaling.
Out on the apron and I need
but Jim Williams, Keeneland's communication director, is optimistic.
No, I need KTLB. The industry is deep-rooted here. The top stallions in the world are here. So the long-term viability of the industry, I don't think will be affected. Hopefully, it will be kept to a short-term impact.
Many breeders are already cutting down their cherry trees, hoping that research will eventually back up their hunch. They hope that in future, science will be able to nail down the cause. In the meantime, the industry plows on.
The people are still going to want to find the ideal horse, and they'll go anywhere to get that, and I think they'll still come back to Kentucky.
But the mystery disease continues to alarm breeders, and while scientists grapple with its causes, its effects look set to last for many years to come.